Hi everyone, and congratulations for mastering your one-step equations. So today you are going to get a little review, a refresher on one step to make sure that you understand the process, and then we're going to move you on to the two steps. So your notes look like this, and basically how notes work is basically you write everything down that I write down, and if I tell you to pause the video, I do want you to stop the video temporarily, try the problem on your own, and then you can hit play again and see if you got your answer correct. In order for you to move on to any additional practice, we should see your notes completed. All right, so let's begin. All right, so the first part is that one-step equations. So the main thing you need to keep in mind is I always tell my students to put a line down the equal sign. So we're going to take a look at this problem right here. There we go. So I always put a line on the equal sign so that we know whatever we do to one side of the equation, we must do to the other. The next thing I also tell my students to do is put a box around the variable. By doing that, then you know that that's what you want to isolate. I want to get the m all by itself. So now the next thing to do is to undo. We have to do inverse operations. So if it says to add, we want to subtract. If it says subtract, we want to add. Multiply, divide, divide, and multiply. So in this case, there is a plus 12 in here. So the inverse of adding 12 would be subtracting 12. So we would put the subtracting 12 right underneath the adding 12. And whatever we do to one side of the equation, because right now we have just taken 12 off. So now we want to make sure we take 12 off the other side so that it evens back out again. So we're going to subtract 12 over here. Carry my equal sign down. And then what you'll notice is that we're left with our m on this side, because plus 12 minus 12 cancels out and gives you a 0. And that's basically what you want. You want zeros over there. So m's all by itself. And now we just have to ask ourselves, 10 minus 12 equals -2. And there is your answer. So you're doing the inverse operations. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video, make sure you do the next 4, and I want to see the work and the process, not just an answer. So I want to see all of this being done. Then you check your answers and see if you did it correctly. All right, here are the answers for the one-step equations. In this problem, g is our isolated variable. Should have the box around it. We want to get GL by itself. This is a -9 or subtract 9, so we need to add 9 to both sides of the equation to keep it balanced, and our answer is 7 equals G. Here is a multiplication problem. We want to isolate the y and get it all by itself, so therefore if this is a multiplying by -7, we are going to divide by a -7. Notice when we divide, I do the fraction bar for divide. It makes it real simple, and you notice when I put the line down the middle, it equals 1, because anything divided by itself equals 1. So we have 1y left over. And then on the other side, 91 divided by 7 equals, or -7 equals 13. Over here we have a division problem, a divided by 9. How do we get rid of division? We multiply. We multiply both sides by 9. In this case, it's 9 over 1. The 9's cancel out. We're left with 1, again, 1a, and -4 times 9 is 36. If you have any questions at this point, feel free to take a minute and look over these problems before we move on to two-step equations. All right, two-step equations. Before two-step equations, we're going to talk about fractions. So when you're dealing with fractions, in order to get rid of, we're really talking about inverse, taking the inverse of a fraction. So for example, 3/4, the inverse of 3/4 would actually be 4 over 3. It's switching the numerator and the denominator around. And when you do that, your answer, 3 times 4 is 12. 4 times 3 is 12. So what that really does is give you an answer of 1. And that's a good number to work with because anything times 1 is the number itself. So for fractions, in order to get rid of that fraction, we must multiply by the inverse. We also call that inverse the reciprocal. So let's take a look at a fraction within our problem. So you'll notice there's a big difference between number 5 and something like number 4. In number 4, you'll notice that the a is actually part of it, so it's a divided by 9. In this one, you see that the variable's outside. It's 2/3 times x. So in order to get rid of that 2/3, we want to take the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3 over 2. And whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do over here, 3 over 2. So what you'll notice on the one side is that the 3's cancel out and the 2's cancel out and leaves you with 1. So our x is isolated on that side. And now we just have to multiply on the other side. So in order to multiply fractions, we need to make them both fractions. So we make anything a fraction by putting it over 1. And then we just multiply numerators and multiply denominators. 10 times 3 is 30. And 1 times 2 is 2. So my answer would be 30 over 2, but is that in simplest form? No, we could divide. So 30 divided by 2 actually equals 15. And there is our answer. All right, so you're going to go ahead and complete the next 3 problems. Before you go any further, though, you'll notice that there is a number missing here. So in your notes, it should be 4 over 9. So put a 9 in your notes. Go ahead and pause the video, and when you come back, you'll see the 4 answers. If you have any questions on those, you can take a minute to look them over or bring them up to me when you meet with the teacher when we all finished. Okay, and here are the remaining 3 answers for the one-step equations when dealing with fractions. Just remember again, it's always taking the inverse. So the inverse of 4/9 is 9/4. Whatever you do to the one side, you do to the other side, and you multiply going across, and you simplify. Inverse operation of inverse fraction of -6 over 5 is -5 over 6. Do the same thing to both sides. Get your k by itself. Multiply, simplify, you get your answer. And the last one, inverse of -1/2 is -2 over 1. Multiply on the other side and get your answer. All right, let's move on now finally to multi-step equations or two-step equations as we're focusing on. So two-step equations, we got some notes and a thinking process that we want to think through as we complete these problems. Let's fill out our notes appropriately. So first of all, the first step in two-step equations and to get ready for multi-step is we need to identify the variable. So usually what I do is I put a box around whatever variable's in the problem because that's what you want to isolate. We want to identify the variable so we can isolate the variable and get it all by itself. Once it's by itself, we know its value. All right, we start with the term that is not connected to the variable. So we always start with usually it's the adding or subtracting part of the problem. We always do that first. It's kind of like we do the opposite of the order of operations. So if it's parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, then adding, subtracting, we're going to go backwards. So we want to start with any adding, subtracting because we're actually going the opposite direction now. So we're going to not start with the variable, and then we are going to use our inverse operations to undo the equation. So we are going to undo all the adding in the problem and all the subtracting. So basically we're removing the constant that's on the variable on the side of the variable. After we get everything over to the other side, then we're going to undo the equation with the multiplication and the division. So that way we get rid of the coefficient, and that should leave the variable isolated. Some things to remember for the golden rule. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you must do to the other. Plain and simple. Just always remember that, and you'll keep your equation balanced. Finally, a great tool, you should never get equations wrong because you can always take your answer, substitute it in place of the variable, and you should get the left side of your equation should equal the right side if you did it right. So substituting is a great way to guarantee you have the right answer. All right, we're going to do a variety of problems on this side, and then you're going to get a chance to move forward. So what I'm going to do actually right now is I see that I'm running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to pause it right here and then come back to the next video and we'll finish the practice.